Hello, welcome back to the channel. So we've just had the Labour budget announcement on Wednesday. At the time of recording this, it is Friday, and I just wanted to go through my thoughts really and the key takeaways that I thought about when looking at the budget. So let's go. So to start with, this isn't going to be a comprehensive review of every single policy. I have had the time to read through some of the papers that came off of the back of the announcement and just look at some of the finer details. And I just wanted to call out some of the key points that I thought were interesting and more relevant to the kind of everyday person that I guess this channel is aimed at. So it won't be a fully in-depth view into some of the finer detailed changes, things like the agricultural land tax and bits like that. Probably won't cover, but I will cover some of the things that I think will be more relevant to the average person watching this video. So to start with, the key one is income tax. Now, as a headline figure watching the announcement, it looks like great news. They're not going to increase income tax. However, one of the more disappointing things about this, and it's something that's been a common theme now since probably back to 2019, is that they haven't actually increased the income tax bands along with inflation. So this is what's known as a stealth tax. And in effect, it means that as your income increases, so you probably get pay rises at work. Even Labour have just announced the minimum wage increase, which on face value looks really good. They haven't increased the limits to when you get taxed. So for those looking at these limits, I think it's like 12,570 is the point at which you start paying 20% tax, and that hasn't really changed since 2019. They did give you the £70 uplift in 2021, but it is really, really disappointing to see that this hasn't moved yet again for another year. So everyone that is now being pushed up salary wise will be pushed into these brackets where they're paying tax. So in effect, the government has managed to increase your taxes without saying directly that they're increasing your taxes. For me, I always get really disappointed when I see this with politicians. They do it more for the headline views of saying that they're benefiting you without being upfront and honest and just saying, inflation's going up, but we're not going to increase your tax allowance. And for those of us that are earning above the £50,270 threshold, it means that more of your money is going to be getting taxed at the 40% bracket. So really any increase that you get, you're only getting 60p on the pound, which at a time when cost of living is at its highest and still slightly going up, it just doesn't really feel that good. And I do wish the government were a bit more forthcoming with how these different tax elements operate and were just a bit more transparent. I don't know why they're not, because ultimately, as I'm pointing out now and many other people are pointing out, we give you the reality of what they're trying to do. So that is a shame for me. I guess just on that point as well, if the bands had been increased in line with inflation, and as we saw, inflation's been really, really high, even if they kept pace with that, we'd see that the basic rate tax band would have probably increased to around £15,000. This means that for most people, they're losing out on £700 extra of tax per year because these bands haven't gone up, which all of these stimulus packages and help and things that they put out there, you could just raise the bands and people would get that money naturally through their wages. So I really don't know why they do that, and I've probably stressed it more than I need to in the last couple of minutes, but it is super disappointing to see this. I really wish they would do something about that. On income tax, or just taxes in general, the biggest call out, I guess, was the employer's national insurance. This has now gone up to 15%, and along with going up to 15%, they've also decreased the threshold on which you pay it from 9,000 to 5,000. This is huge. I don't really know how to get this across, because obviously, tax might not be the most exciting of topics, but it's probably one of the biggest changes we've seen to taxes in at least the last 5 years, maybe even 10 years. It's huge. And whilst again the government are saying that they're not increasing personal income taxes or workers' taxes, which strictly speaking technically is true, they are increasing the employer's side that they have to pay. So for those of you who don't know, you have income tax deductions and then you have national insurance deductions. What you don't necessarily see, or you might not know, is that your employer also has to pay a percentage to the government for employing you into national insurance. So where you might pay 12%, your employer might pay 12%, that's where you get to the 24. This has now gone up to 15% on the employer side, which is a huge number. And it's not to be looked at and going, this is the employer's responsibility. This, for me, is where governments kind of let themselves down a bit and don't really look too far into the future in terms of the impacts of this. They just look at the here and now and kind of, I understand it, because a lot of politics is a popularity contest. They need to be seen to be doing the right thing to get voted in and to keep their jobs ultimately. So that's why they do it. I'm going to try and steer clear away from my political views specifically, and just stick to the finances, but that's kind of my view on why they do these things. And in terms of this employer's increase, you've just kind of got to sit back and think, right, so if I'm a business owner and I have to now pay an extra, my costs to employ people are going up to 15% on top of their salaries, what am I going to do with that cost? Well, I'm not going to lose profit. So I've got one of two options, and that's either going to be, and I'm not trying to fearmonger here, but I'm just being honest, like this is what I would think like, and probably what a lot of business owners are thinking like. I would either cut my staff to reduce this cost. Salary increases are coming up, so I'm definitely not going to pay them anymore because I need to stomach this cost. Or the only real other way they can get this back is to increase prices, pass it on to the customers. It's just maths. That's how it works. They need to make profit. That's the whole point of being in business. So it won't directly, immediately impact working people, but by April, when this comes in, I can see it being a huge impact on people, both in terms of real wages will not increase as much as we see, because employers, rather than giving you a pay rise, will have to factor in that they've got to pay these increased costs. So it will just go directly to the government. So in effect, you are kind of being taxed. And if they put their prices up to accommodate this, then it negates any increase that they've put on minimum wage or any wage increases that you do get, because the cost of your goods will go up because the employers or the businesses need to make back this money. So I don't know. I feel I want to say the government must know that these are potential impacts of the policies they put in. They are very limited in what they can do. It really does feel sometimes like they give with one hand and they immediately take away with the other. So again, this is, for me at least, very disappointing. Of course, there are going to be different schools of thought on this, but I don't think this was necessarily a good move, especially considering that Labour were the ones that are pro-business, right? They want businesses to thrive and grow and do well and employ people. Kind of sticking them with this extra tax really doesn't feel great to me. Anyway, the third point I wanted to cover is the change to pensions. This one I thought was really quite bad. I can understand why they've done it, and it's to kind of, they need to make this money from somewhere to help the country. But I feel like by putting pensions into your inheritance tax pot, so previously a lot of pensions were excluded from this calculation, so you would get it on your assets, your house, things like that. Now they're going to put pensions into that calculation as well. So if you've worked really hard and you've got a pension that you want to pass down to your kids or whatever, if you're able to, that will now be subject to inheritance tax, which can be up to 40%. So it just feels again like I don't know, does it discourage people from trying to save up and build these assets? And maybe that's the point. Maybe that's what they want to do. I don't know, but for me, I feel like people get taxed enough throughout their life. They get, yes, you get tax saving on the money you put into your pension up to a point. You pay tax when you withdraw it, and then to tax that again after you've died is I don't know. Feels quite bad, but again, maybe taking it from that pot rather than people that are actively working at the time is a solution they had to use. So yeah, for me, not a fan, but I can understand why. Yeah. On inheritance tax, which is actually quite an interesting point, similar to what I mentioned before about income tax thresholds, they've frozen the allowance to £325,000 lifetime allowance, which obviously if you're married and then you pass your assets down to your kids, that doubles to 650, provided you haven't used that for anything else. It does sound like a lot of money, but we've had unprecedented asset price rises in the last even 5 years. Most houses now cost more than £325,000, like a standard 4-bed, which means that if you're, and I'll take the 325 as an individual, perhaps your parents were divorced and you're just inheriting one off your dad, that would mean, or your mum, that would mean that you would only have a £325 allowance. If that house cost 425k, you'd have to pay 40% of the £100,000 difference, which for most people who would look to inherit their family home and maybe use it or utilize the asset and keep it within the family, they're not going to have 40 grand lying around to pay over, so they're going to have to sell it. And again, I can understand why they're very limited in the taxes and things that they can increase to generate this money, but in a budget that's specifically designed to not impact the working person, it very much feels like it's impacting the everyday working person. So I'm not asking them for huge rises. I'm not even asking them to backdate it, but starting to increase this threshold. It's now fixed until 2030. And if we see asset prices increase in the next 5 years, as they had done in the previous 5 years, that really isn't going to cover a lot in the UK. So I don't know. I don't know if that feels like the right decision. While I'm saying this, I do try and think what would the right decision be. And in all honesty, I don't know. I think the UK is struggling. When you look outside and you look at the infrastructure and you look at the quality of living, it's not what it used to be, and it's such a shame because it is my country. I do like this country. My family are here. I wish it was thriving, but it just feels like sometimes governments don't really know what they're doing, and it is a shame to see. And it's a shame when people get penalised for working hard, like I think freezing these thresholds does. The final point I wanted to cover was stamp duty. This saw quite a big change in that they're now going to increase the surcharge. I think it goes from 3% up to 5%. So that's quite a huge increase when you think about someone who's buying a house. And if you're not a first-time buyer, where you can almost the current first-time buyer schemes still are in place for now. But if you're moving into your second home, having to pay 5%, not 3%, is huge. It's almost double, and we all know the pain of paying stamp duty. So it really isn't a pleasant change to see. They are also looking to reduce the limit. So at the moment, it's at 250k, which, let's be real, is only a starter home. But at least it meant that anything over the 250k, you might be safe on. But now it's being reduced to. It's being reduced to 125k, which covers nothing. Who can buy a house for 125k? So it basically means that you're now going to have an extra 5% on any house purchase that you do, which is, again, awesome, but not aimed at the working person, right? So we can't forget that. So in summary, not amazing. like I said, I've missed out a couple of the other points, and there were, there's a hefty document of all the specifics, but these were the key call-outs for me, and the ones that are going to impact me the most. I do feel, I say feel for the government. Don't get me wrong, they're really well paid, and but it is a tough decision to make, and I don't know. I kind of know some of the things I probably would try, but I think it all boils down to having to have a really difficult conversation with the general public. We're all aware that the UK isn't where it used to be. I've heard a really good analogy before filming this, actually, which is that the UK is kind of like a really old 5-star hotel. So one that, maybe 20, 30 years ago was absolute premium. It was probably the best place you could stay. But since then, they've done absolutely nothing in terms of updating the decor, investing in the building, buying new facilities, things like that. So you can still feel the quality, but it is 30, 40 years ago. And I think that's definitely the same for the UK and how I'm feeling and how I see the current state of the economy. The UK requires a huge amount of investment and I think a huge amount of work from everyone. Unfortunately, that is a conversation the government is never going to have, because it means that, as our current political system works, being a popularity contest, they can't roll in and go, look guys, it's never going to be the same. At least for this generation. There's going to have to be a 20 or 30 or 40 year period now where standards are not going to be as good as they were. We're going to have to tax directly the working person to invest in the country while also paying down our debt. And that is something they're never going to do, but it's probably something that I would, and then immediately be jobless because I'd get voted out immediately. But I think that's the conversation they need to have, right? We can't just borrow our way out of it, stick plasters on it, do these little policies that end up impacting us but not improving it. We all just need to kind of, pull our socks up and rebuild this country. But is that going to happen? Well, you probably can tell my view. I don't think it will. And that's it. Those are my review points from the budget, the key ones that I thought would be useful for the people viewing this, and hope that you've got some value out of it. Like I said before, I do like the UK, and part of me hopes I'm wrong. Part of me hopes that some of the things that I've thought about and maybe predicted there are wrong, and actually it turns out that these policies make great changes and improve the UK. I genuinely do hope that, but I'm a realist and probably a pessimist, and I just wanted to put these points out there so you understand what potentially we could be facing into and how it impacts you. Of course, as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment. If you have any other policies, by the way, as well, that you think would help, please do leave them as well, because I'd love to hear your thoughts, because obviously, my thoughts are just my own thoughts. Everyone's got a different opinion, and it would just be interesting to see what people would come up with if they were in Rachel Reeves' shoes and had that opportunity. But other than that, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.